Hello and welcome into the third edition of the Top Tier Sports podcast. My name is Ian McKinney and I'll be your host for this evening. Tonight we've got a fantastic show lineup for you guys. Special edition playoff roundtable. We're going to be joined as usual by our guests Cael, Sleezer, and Alec, Helmle. So guys, I just want to get straight down into it. First, New Year's Six game. Well, quick disclaimer for those of you listening. The Cotton Bowl is taking place actually as we're recording this, so that will not be featured. But what will be featured is the Peach Bowl between Cincinnati and Georgia. So just sort of right off the bat, what are your thoughts about that game?
All right, so I guess I'll take this first. So I think this matchup really sets up well, kind of like that. Those who are the kind of the first out kind of the college football playoff, kind of that good, we'll say, I don't want to say exactly consolation game, but as far as two very good teams going at each other, as far as Cincinnati, I've been watching them a lot this season, just as far as they've been picking up the pace. They look like a top caliber team. They look like, as Cael said last week, they could have made the top four there in the college football playoff. And I'm sad to see that they didn't. Anyway, that's a discussion for a later date. But what I haven't been impressed with this season, and I think the rankings kind of reflect this, with Cincinnati at 8 and Georgia at 9. I think Georgia's a higher caliber team than what they've been playing at. And I think in order to be the best game for them, they have to go out there and prove that. They have to go out and prove that they can beat a on-the-roll Cincinnati team. And not be I think they are 7-2 Georgia team that everybody's kind of looking at them to be for right now.
Well, first of all, I think Alec made a lot of good points. These are both very high caliber teams. And again, on what Alec said, Georgia's really got to prove that they are one really good game short, in my opinion, from really being considered worthy of maybe taking one of those last playoff spots, because both of these teams have played 9 games. Cincinnati is undefeated, and as Alex said, Georgia's 7-2. Their only losses are to Alabama and Florida, but those were both pretty big losses. But that Cincinnati team's been very fun to watch. They're non-Power 5, and they've just made a splash. They're kind of along the lines of BYU and Coastal Carolina, and I'll even throw Liberty in there, that were kind of impressive teams that kind of came out of the framework a little bit this year, and COVID's kind of stirred everything up. But Cincinnati's a great case of taking advantage of opportunities once chaos kind of ensues around the country. So all of that being said, Georgia is favored by 7 points in this game, which, looking at it at a quick glance, you say, yeah, okay. But Cincinnati is a very, very strong team. I think it's going to be much closer than a 7-point game. We might see a late game field goal separating this matchup. So this is probably going to be one of the best New Year's Six bowl games in the last few years, if it truly lives up to the hype.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, especially because, I mean, we might love the mailman, but, I don't think Stetson Bennett should be consistently a starting quarterback at an SEC school, let alone a Georgia team that's trying to compete, 4 national championships and 4 playoffs. And I think that since they've finally put JT Daniels in, this is going to be their first really big test with that. And Cincinnati's got a fantastic secondary. And I think that, we can say, oh, yeah, this offense looks fantastic against Mississippi State and stuff. But it's like, yes, but Georgia should be beating Mississippi State. They're unranked and Georgia's a top 10 team. This is going to be a really big test for that offense. And especially going forward, because Georgia is going to retain most of their offensive pieces from this year, not just for what's left of this 2020 season, but even going forward to 2021. So I guess we've talked a little bit about the Georgia side of things. Does anybody have any anything more to add about Cincinnati?
They're very strong on both sides of the ball. That's why they are ranked higher than Georgia going in, along with their undefeated record. But I think Cincinnati definitely has a chance to solidify themselves in the college football landscape for a lot of people who really might not have paid much attention this year, because Cincinnati has just blown all expectations out of the water. They are up there with the big dogs this year, or the big cats if we're going by mascots.
Mm-hmm.
But Cincinnati will definitely put themselves on the map a little bit if they can pull out this one, especially if they do it by more than a field goal, which I could definitely see them doing.
I'll agree with Cael there. I think Cincinnati smells blood in the water. I think they can feel a victory coming down the pipeline. All it is a matter of execution on game day. Can Cincinnati, that kind of – because there's also a mentality going into this about facing a big-time SEC school like Cael mentioned. It's like that daunting task of getting over the mountain. The mentality Cincinnati needs to come in with is that Georgia is minuscule compared to their accomplishments. Cincinnati's accomplishments this season far outweigh that of Georgia's. They go in with that mentality. Cincinnati will definitely triumph over Georgia, and it will be by a larger point margin than even a field goal, like Cael said. I think by Cincinnati showing up and really scoring out against Georgia is going to really bring out that idea of there are teams out there that are coming for that title and that can hang with the best of them, and they're not Power 5 conferences.
I think that what's really going to determine the game is going to be, at the beginning of the season, we talked about, is Desmond Ridder going to be able to carry this team to where they want to be? I don't think they were in the playoff discussion at the beginning of the year, but they were for sure in that, best group of 5 New Year's 6 discussion. And he's put up some good numbers, but not necessarily against the greatest teams. And I think it'll just be interesting to see how he matches up against that Georgia secondary. I guess it is picks time. So we can start with Alec.
Yeah, I'm right with it as far as picks go. I'm right on Cincinnati. I think the spread in Vegas is a little biased. I think that Cincinnati is either going to win up by 3 or at least by a field goal, or they're going to go out by at least 7-14, if not more. Because I think that Cincinnati team is very much a scrappy fighting team, and that Georgia team is not ready for the storm that's about to come down on them.
Cael?
Yeah, I'm going to pick Cincinnati in this game because I just don't see Georgia beating this scrappy Cincinnati team. And again, piggybacking on what Alex said, that I do think that Vegas spread is a little bit biased toward an SEC team. And I don't think that Cincinnati will win by 14 points, but I think they can win by anywhere between 3 or maybe even close to double digits as far as point-wise. So I've got Cincinnati in this one.
Yeah, I think that this was a bit tougher of a decision for me than you guys are at least making it sound like. For you, I would say that if this was just a normal game, like it just was like week 5 or something like that, it could still be neutral site or whatever. I'd probably take Georgia. I think a lot of this comes down to quarterback play, and I don't trust Ridder against that UGA secondary. But the past couple of years when, Georgia's just missed out on those playoff berths, they really haven't shown up in the bowl games. And quite frankly, I don't trust them to. So for that, and obviously we know Cincinnati's going to come ticked off, ready to play. So I think I'm going to stick with you guys and go Cincinnati. So I guess that leads us to our next game, and I know Cael is extremely excited for this one. So I'll let him talk first. Cael, how do you think your Cyclones are going to do against Oregon?
Well, I know that I am still hurting from that Big 12 championship game loss, and this matchup is Iowa State versus Oregon in the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl over in Arizona. And Brock Purdy is an Arizona native, so he is going to feel very comfortable kind of in his own backyard, to put in that term. But Iowa State is favored by 3.5. And they have played 11 games. Oregon has played 6. Oregon had that one really embarrassing loss to Oregon State. And Oregon State kind of shocked everybody as far as the big picture. Like, I think they were kind of slept on going into that Oregon game. But Oregon had sky-high expectations going into the season as well. And they kind of dropped the ball. Like, yeah, they had big wins over Stanford, Washington State, and then they edged one out against UCLA. But then they dropped 2 in a row to Oregon State and then Cal. But they've only played half the games that Iowa State has played. And Oregon barely finished at 25th in the rankings. So with what the Iowa State offense has done this year, especially with Breece Hall being a top 10 Heisman candidate, I'm trying to be as little bit biased here as I can, since I have been an Iowa State fan since I came out of the womb. But I really don't see how Oregon can pull this win off. I really just don't see it. I think Iowa State will just dominate this game once they get a flow going.
No, I'll piggyback off what Cael said there. I'm actually, even as an Iowa fan myself, I'm really excited to watch this game. I think this will be a very fun matchup. Not an interesting, but a fun matchup. The reason I use the word fun is because I think these two offenses, as far as anything goes, are really going to give each other a good showing. I know Iowa State is just – I've seen their immersion as a team over the last few years under their new head coach. His name eludes me at this point. Cael, you think you can help me out here?
Matt Campbell.
Matt Campbell, thank you. I was thinking from the basketball team. But Matt Campbell has very much importantly whipped that program into shape. I just really like what he's done. I cannot deny the viability of Iowa State as far as a team perspective goes. And I understand, Cael, that bad loss there in the Big 12 championship kind of sent you guys back, especially after beating Oklahoma in the regular season. And, you know, I know we said we weren't going to talk about it, the Goodyear Bowl that's happening tonight. But I think something needs to be said for that Oklahoma versus Florida matchup. I think that's kind of just embarrassing. It's a matchup of embarrassing teams who've just kind of wet the bed as far as play goes this season. I think Iowa State really deserved to be kind of closer to that mix than playing a 25 Oregon team, which, let's be honest here, I think Iowa State's going to run all over them. I think that's going to be closer to that kind of 14-point spread that we were talking about, rather than Cincinnati, honestly. I think I'll backtrack on that. As far as that Cincinnati game, maybe 10 points there. But definitely this game is going to be one for Iowa State fans to be celebrating afterwards, barring any unfortunates.
Well, real quick, I was actually going to bring this up. We can use like the combo for our picks. So do we just want to real quick go around and say who we would pick?
I mean, sure. I'll throw out I'll go Florida. I'm really not impressed with Oklahoma this season. I haven't been impressed with Oklahoma for the past couple years now. They seem to always wet the bed at the worst times and then come back and play their best on the weirdest of games. So it seems to me that Oklahoma is just not a team with a lot of consistency. I think Florida and what Kyle Trask has done in Florida, albeit those 3 losses that they've had, they look really good, and I think going into this game, it's going to be at least a 7-point spread. I think it's going to be a touchdown or a little less maybe.
This is a very tough decision for me because these are two very high-powered offensive teams, and being someone who follows Big 12 football closely, Oklahoma did not start off the year well. They looked very not Oklahoma as far as football. And they really came together after those first few losses, and they haven't lost a game since early in the season. And then you go over to Florida, who have lost their last 2, Granted, one of them was because of a shoe thrown 20 yards down the field, but a loss is a loss. And it was to a mediocre LSU team as far as them coming off their championship season from last year. But, man, this is such a tough choice for me because Kyle Trask is definitely a Heisman finalist. He's had a very good year. He put up Burrow-like numbers from last year. I really don't know. I usually have my picks done and down, but this matchup is just two very high-powered offenses going at it and then solid defense to back that up. Florida is reeling from their loss in the SEC championship, and Oklahoma is rolling from their 6th straight Big 12 championship win, if I remember the numbers correctly on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like Alex said, it's going to be a very close game. But I think Florida is going to edge this one out. I think Trask is going to have a late game situation where he has a chance to take his team down the field and score either a go-ahead field goal or a touchdown. I think Kyle Trask is going to be in a position to win the game late, and I think he will take it.
I actually disagree with both of you guys. I think that there's been Florida's top 4 receivers opted out of the bowl game. So, personally, I disagree with y'all wholeheartedly. I think that Florida is a better team than Notre Dame. And I think that if they didn't have the 3 losses, I think on a neutral field, Florida kills Notre Dame. And I'm going to stand by that. However, you losing your top 4 receivers, I think Oklahoma would be my national championship favorite for 2021, actually. I think Spencer Rattler's shown a ton of growth throughout the season. And, I'm not 100% sure that Florida defense couldn't stop a 6-year-old from scoring. And that Oklahoma defense is the best defense they've had in a long while. Certainly of the Lincoln Riley era and probably the last give or take decade. So give me the Sooners. So I guess back to the Fiesta Bowl. I guess since y'all were like Debbie Downers on Oregon, I actually disagree. I think that this is going to be one of my favorite matchups of the bowl season. Cael Von Thibodeau is a stud for Oregon. And, he was a 5-star recruit on the defensive line. And I don't know how much Pac-12 y'all watch. I watch a decent amount of it. But Cael Von Thibodeau is ridiculous. Like, I understand Breece Hall's had a fantastic year. But, Cael Von Thibodeau and really the rest of that Oregon offense, I think that is going to be a better defense than just about everybody that they faced in the Big 12. So I think that paired with, I think Tyler Shuck's a better quarterback is better at being quarterback than he gets credit for. He's more dangerous with his legs than people think he is. I think this is going to be a closer game than y'all think. Cael, what's the look for?
I don't know, man. I just really don't see Iowa State having a bad game after their Big 12 championship loss because they faltered in the first half. Iowa State's had a few games where they've faltered in the first half, but then made some halftime adjustments and came out really strong in the second half and either winning the game or making it very, very close like they did in the Big 12 championship. They were 33 yards away from scoring that go-ahead touchdown with very little time remaining. I will indulge your point a little bit, Ian. I think that Oregon team doesn't get quite enough credit as they might be given, especially with the weak overall Pac-12 play this year. But again, you've got to take those losses into account. Lost to Cal, lost to Oregon State. Iowa State's losses, excluding the week 1 loss eons ago, to that Louisiana Cajuns team, there's the 3-point loss to Oklahoma State, who then fell off the wagon toward the end of the year with Chuba Hubbard being hurt, and then that close Big 12 championship loss. Iowa State's going to be out for blood. And yes, Oregon may get off to a fast start. Sometimes Iowa State has trouble adjusting defensively on those first few possessions. But once halftime hits, Matt Campbell is going to make all of those adjustments that he's very good at making at halftime. And if Iowa State falters in the first half, if at all, they will not in the second half. Iowa State will win the second half for sure with the way that they have adjusted at halftime this season. So I can understand not sleeping on Oregon as far as the point spread, but again, I think Vegas got it wrong. Iowa State should be favored by more than 3.5. I think they will win by more than one possession. I think it will be a 2-possession game when it's all said and done.
So where would you have the line at?
The line at anywhere between 10 and 15 maybe toward the end, with the way that Breece Hall has been playing this year especially, and Iowa State's receivers have increasingly been getting better, and they've spread the wealth over Akers and Hutchinson and even Shaw and Dylan Sainer at tight ends. He's done well, and then K.URE at tight end, he's done well. Iowa State just has so many offensive weapons. I think they're just going to run all over Oregon once they get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I'm not going to dispute Cael's point there. I'm still with Cael on Iowa State being the victor as far as the Fiesta Bowl goes. But I want to pose this to you, Cael. With everything that Ian mentioned about Oregon, do you think if Iowa State does take that falter in the first half there, that might be the deciding factor whether or not they're able to come back in the second half? I know Iowa State's more looked like a second-half team this season as far as their losses go, even coming back from those halftime adjustments. If you mentioned, as Oregon gets off to that fast start and Iowa State falters, do you think the line to gain becomes too far away from Iowa State?
No. I don't doubt that for a second. Iowa State's been down in many games this year. I got the privilege to go to the Baylor game a few months ago when I was prepping for my article for K.URE Radio, and Iowa State was down by 11 points at halftime. Purdy had 3 interceptions in the first half. He looked worse than I have ever seen him. And then they come out at halftime and they just absolutely dominate in the third quarter. I think they outscored Baylor 24-3, or I don't think it was that much, but it was definitely a 2-score advantage as far as the third quarter, and they were up. And Baylor had a chance to win the game at the end, or at least tie it, and then Mike Rose had that game-sealing interception at the end. So from what I've seen from Iowa State this season, yes, they may falter starting out, but I don't think, unless it is a huge, gross defensive lapse, like being down by 17 at one point, then maybe. But if Iowa State can keep it within 10, 11 points at any point, they are in a position to win the game from what I've seen this year.
Yeah, well, I think that this will make it interesting as far as picks go, but not really, because I definitely know what teams you're picking, and I definitely don't know what team I'm picking. So I guess I'll go last. Cael, you go first.
If any of you have even known me for 5 seconds of my life, you know I'm an Iowa State fan. And as far as football has gone in the last few years, you should not bet against Iowa State. It's not a smart move, especially with the season they had this year. We reached 6th this year as far as the college football playoff rankings. That's our highest ranking ever, period, with anyone, any team, any coach. 6th in the country. And Oregon where did Oregon start out this year? 8th or 9th? Somewhere around there, maybe a little bit lower.
I think they started when they came back in I think they were mid-teens, sorry.
Mid-teens, yes, 11th through 13th, I think so. But I just don't see a scenario where Oregon wins this game. Like, I'm a realist. I'm not so much into blind faith in my team that I don't consider all angles. But I just don't see Iowa State losing this game. I really don't see it. I take Iowa State in this one.
Alec?
I'm right with you, Cael. Even as an Iowa fan myself and a sworn enemy of the Iowa State Cyclones, I have to give them credit for what they've been doing this season, what they've been doing in the past few years. In the past few years, just even looking at their games against Iowa, they have looked like a completely different team each year, and it's because of those adjustments Matt Campbell has been making as far as that Iowa State offense, and then just looking at an amazing defense. So I don't see I won't say as far as Cael goes that there's not a situation that I don't see Oregon winning, especially if Iowa State makes that falter in that first half, and that's a big falter. But I do see Iowa State winning. I think it's Iowa State. I'm going to go for the Cyclones in this one.
Yeah, I think that this is I think that Iowa State's more likely to win. Obviously, I'm too young to gamble. I'd probably take Oregon on the spread, but it pisses me off that Oregon got into the New Year's Six Bowl and Indiana didn't. So I'm going to take Iowa State for that reason and that reason only.
I'm not going to argue with your end game on the logic there, Ian. But all right, well, your reasons are your reasons. If you're picking Iowa State, I'm not going to argue with why.
So I guess our final non-playoff New Year's Six game that we haven't covered is the Orange Bowl between the North Carolina Tar Heels and the Ampersand U Aggies. Shout out to RJ Young, also known as the Texas A&M Aggies. So I think Cael started the last one. So we'll start with Alec. Just initial thoughts.
All I got to say is what an impressive season for the Aggies. I mean, coming into this, again, I'll back off what Cael said. No one has expected what's been doing here in 2020. I think a lot of teams have been able to come out of that framework. I don't think anybody saw Texas A&M sitting at number 5 in the country coming into this season. I've been quite impressed with how they've been playing. And just that Aggies offense is just something you shouldn't be messing with right now. It's I don't want to say what it's reminiscent of, but I don't think that a North Carolina team ranked at 13 coming into this game, I just don't see one of those ACC teams, especially those bottomed out ACC teams, being able to beat an Aggie squad that's just honestly on fire right now. They kind of remind me of a Cincinnati, that team that come out of the framework and that's able to make a name for themselves as far as just being in contention and being just on that edge of the college football playoff. So
Cael?
Well, for this game, I'm going to piggyback off of what Alec says. I feel like we're sharing a brain here, Alec, with a lot of the things we're saying tonight. But Texas A&M has had a very impressive season. It's very hard to argue with what they've done. In my opinion, I do think that they should be where Ohio State is right now as far as the playoffs. I think Texas A&M is a college football playoff team because their only loss is to Alabama. And they've beat some good teams. They beat Florida. They might not have as strong a schedule as some other SEC teams, but their only loss is to Alabama. They managed to beat Florida. They managed to beat a sputtering LSU team. They beat Auburn by 11, which was nice. And then their last game, they beat Tennessee by 3 touchdowns. And again, 8-1, only lost is to Florida. Or Alabama. They managed to beat Florida. I think they're a playoff team. And as far as North Carolina, they have emerged a lot in the last few years as a good football school. They're known a lot for basketball, but I'd say that their football team is better than their basketball team is right now. They've definitely emerged in the football atmosphere. And they have had some puzzling games this year. Like, they lost to Virginia, which is a game that they really should have won. And they only lost that one by 3, but that's still a loss. They lost to Florida State, who has also sputtered this year. So that's another bit of a red flag for me. And then they lost to Notre Dame, which isn't too bad. They did lose by 14, but it's hard to compete with that Notre Dame team this year with their high-powered offense and Ian Book. But North Carolina, coming off of their last two games against Miami and Western Carolina, they beat Miami 62-26. That's a lot of points. And then the game before that, they won by 40 against Western Carolina. So, again, not a great team, but 40 points is 40 points. You got to be impressed with that at least a little bit. But this is going to be a very interesting matchup to watch. And I think this is going to be a very good Orange Bowl. And this is on the second. This is going to be on right after Iowa State's game, I believe. So I might turn this one on and watch, because I really haven't gotten a close look at Texas A&M as far as watching them in action. I've seen some of their numbers, and I've been impressed with the numbers. But I haven't actually seen A&M play this year. So I might just flip that game on after Iowa State hopefully beats Oregon.
Yeah, man, okay, one thing about this game is either going to suck or it's going to go into like triple overtime, and there's going to be no in between with it. I mean, yeah, there's different routes that you can take with this game, because bowl games, half of the battle is just figuring out if the team's motivated or not. That's why I didn't pick Georgia, because I did not believe that they would be motivated. And, does Texas A&M come out sort of flat, thinking, oh, woe is me, we missed the playoffs? Or do they come out pissed and say, hey, we should have been in those playoffs? And then for North Carolina, are they just, sort of happy to be there? Or are they going to be that team that, we saw throughout a lot of the year, just sort of that fantastic offense, and then just sort of do well enough so that they don't drown when their defense comes back on the field?
No, I think this is going to be a great game to watch as far as looking at the future of college football. I think these two programs have a very much unique play style, both of the two of them. And I think Ian's right. This is going to be a game that's either going to be very close and going to triple overtime or something along those lines, or this is going to be a blowout. And if it is a blowout, if it does come down to it, I'm willing to bet on the side of Texas A&M that they're going to come out with it. I think that A&M's losses this season to a Alabama team, which just turns over teams in like a combine, and then what was their other loss again? Somebody remind me of that.
A&M's only got one loss.
A&M only has the one.
Only has the one. Okay, so just to that Alabama team. But then you got North Carolina losing to that Virginia team. That kind of bespeaks to me that maybe North Carolina is a great team. I'm not going to knock them. But as far as a brawl goes, and like a street fight brawl of a football game, it's going to go to Texas A&M's way. And okay, and I'll throw my pick out there right now. I like the Aggies in this one. I'm going to go for it.
So I guess since Alec is going to change the schedule on us, I guess, Cael, you can pick now, because now Alec runs the channel.
Well, we were going to get there either way, Ian. And again, Alec and I are sharing the same brain tonight. It's going to be definitely a street fight style football game, but I just don't see I think North Carolina is ranked a little bit high. They finished 13th. I think they should be a lower team as far as rankings. And then, as I said earlier, Texas A&M, in my opinion, should have been the 4 seed in the playoff. So the point spread in Vegas is 7.5 points in favor to the Aggies. I think that is probably the most accurate spread we've talked about tonight. But I think A&M will win this one by 10 or 11.
This is such a tough one because part of me in my opinion, Notre Dame and A&M are like approximate equivalents. I mean, just their teams are very similar, so that makes me nervous about picking North Carolina. But at the same time, I love North Carolina and I don't like A&M, so I'm a little biased. What I think it's going to come down to, though, is especially in the Florida State game and in other games too, North Carolina's defense has struggled in the first half, and they've sort of put their offense behind the eight ball. And to really beat North Carolina, I think that you have to have not just a good offense, but a great offense. And I don't think that's what Texas A&M is. I think that they remind me a little bit of a couple of the Michigan teams with Shea Patterson, in the sense that that defense is fantastic. They've got some weapons, but I love Shea Patterson, but I think that their quarterback is just slightly above average, and that's going to lower their ceiling. And I think I'm going to take North Carolina. Oklahoma's going to kill Florida, so it gives me some cushion too in case we end up in a tiebreaker. Yeah, I think I'm going to take the Tar Heels here. I just don't see it for A&M.
A bold claim from Ian McKinney, folks. You heard it here first.
Slow down there.
Hey, this is why I made the podcast, so I could say crazy stuff like that. And speaking of crazy stuff, I'm going to say more crazy stuff right after this commercial break.
Have you ever wanted to create your own podcast but don't know how? Well, want no more? Because I have the solution for you, and that solution is Anchor. If you haven't heard of Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Just let me explain. First off, it is completely free to use. That's right, no goofy free trial stuff, completely free. In addition, there's a creation tool that allows you to not only record, but also edit your podcast right there from your smartphone or computer. In addition, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many other platforms. And get this, you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. To get started, just download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Once again, download the free app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
And welcome back, everybody. Once again, we're still joined here by K.URE's Cael Sleezer and LMTV sports correspondent Alec Helmle. I guess we can start with the one that I think in 90% of people's opinions, unless you're an Alabama or Notre Dame fan, the Rose Bowl, which is being played in Arlington. I'm just going to call it the semifinal because that ain't the Rose Bowl.
No, not the Rose Bowl. Not legitimate. The Big
Not
Ten
this year.
Not legitimate.
It's the Jerry World Bowl, let's be honest.
You're not playing it in Pasadena. You're playing it in Arlington. You have utterly failed the name Rose Bowl at that point. Give the Big Ten back the Rose Bowl. Give me back my Rose Bowl. I want my Rose Bowl back.
Gimme. Speaking of gimme, Alec, give me your first reaction to this Bama Notre Dame showdown.
I know Notre Dame went in and beat Clemson. Big accomplishment. Big caveat to that, though, is that Clemson was down Trevor Lawrence. You look at that championship game, you had Notre Dame versus Clemson in that ACC championship game, and it was Clemson running buck wild on Notre Dame. I've heard this point made that Ian Book is a great quarterback, and while I do love Notre Dame, they're my second favorite team compared to Iowa. I do love them. I've been a fan of them for a couple years now. I've been watching them kind of come up through those ranks and make that name for themselves in the college football playoff. But the last time they were in it, they got absolutely bull-hammered by Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that idea of Notre Dame being back in there under the same leadership, under Ian Book, under that kind of same play style, if you got bullhammered against Clemson and Clemson can give Alabama a run for their money, you're never going to beat Alabama. You will get steamrolled by Alabama. I'm waiting for Alabama's line to come crashing down on Ian Book and that Notre Dame offense like the Red Sea crashing down on Pharaoh's troops. That is going to be a bloodbath as far as I'm concerned. It's a game I will not be tuning into unless I hear it is a close game. As far as close goes, that's 14 points. Close to me in that game is 14 points. Anything above that, I'm not tuning into that game because it's just not worth the watch time. I already have Alabama set up in my championship. Give me Alabama. Give me the Crimson Tide. Roll Tide.
I am 100% with you on that, Alec. And I'm going to go back to the Vegas spread. Alabama is favored to win that game by 20 points. And again, it's going to be a quote-unquote close game if it's floating around 14 in favor of Alabama. They have just been dominant in every sense of the word this year. I think the only thing that could really make them better is if Trevor Lawrence was their quarterback. There's really not anything else you can really look at as far as improving that team. Like, Mac Jones is very, very good. I think he is a step down from Trevor Lawrence. But other than that, you've got the good receiving core. And Alabama's defense, they flipped the switch this year. Like, yeah, they've been good the last few years. But this year, they really figured out their defense. It is going to be a big turnover problem for Notre Dame in this game. I think Alabama gets at least 3 turnovers in this game. At least 3. I will be very shocked if it is less than 3. And again, back to your point, Alec, Ian Book is a good quarterback. I'm not disputing that by any sense. He will likely have a good NFL career if he does not get plagued by injuries. But Alabama is a set-up dynasty. They've been there year after year after year, with the exception of last year. But that was kind of an anomaly with LSU kind of emerging in their Cinderella-like year. But Alabama, when you think college football, you just think Alabama because they're just so dominant. And they get top recruits year after year after year for like the past 15 years at least. It has been all Alabama for the most part, with a little bit of surging by Clemson in the last few years. But there is no way that Alabama loses this game unless like half of their starters go down in the first half. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I just do not see Notre Dame even coming close in this game. I think it's 100% Alabama. Tide's going to roll over the Irish in this one.
I think this is the part of the discussion where I'm supposed to try to give Notre Dame fans hope. And I would just like to apologize to Cael Donalds in advance. Notre Dame's got no prayer. I mean, no chance. I hope LSU enjoyed their 1 year with the label of being the greatest college football team of all time. Not anymore. This Alabama team is it. I mean, Mac Jones arguably has had the best season of any quarterback in the FBS. Devontae Smith is going to win the Heisman, in my opinion, and should win the Heisman, in my opinion. Najee Harris is the second best running back in the maybe the second best running back in college football right now. Their defense is fantastic. Oh, and I forgot to mention, remember, they had another guy named Jalen Waddle who got injured and has been out for the season, who was arguably who's at the bare minimum as good as Devontae Smith. That defense has come on. Steve Sark, and then you look at coaching. Saban's the greatest head coach in the history of college football. Steve Sarkisian has been fantastic at offensive coordinator. I don't know who their defensive coordinator is, but I don't care. They have been absolutely fantastic this year. I would not be surprised if you said the spread was 20.
Yes.
I would not be surprised if Alabama won by twice that much.
Twice that much. Wow.
I'm not picking that, but I would not be surprised if they did.
I mean, I'd throw Bama in for 28, but maybe that'd be the most. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Alec. I think it's definitely going to be a 2+ possession game when it's all said and done. But I think as good as Alabama is, I don't think they can outscore Notre Dame by 30 points. I think I'm going to go down a little bit and say the most they outscore them by is 25. That's what I'm going to go with.
I like how that's your a conservative estimate, though. 25 points in a playoff game, right?
Yeah, like we thought we'd be saying that, and that just goes to show you that, like, what if we had thrown that Cincinnati team in there as far as that college football playoff? Do we think the spread would have been closer? I think on this game alone, you are losing money because of that matchup. The fact that we are in a unanimous consensus that Notre Dame is going to get their rears handed to them is the fact of the matter that I said I won't be tuning into that game. And if we know that, I don't see you guys tuning into that game, if only to just see how bad Notre Dame is getting squashed.
But I guess we can move on to the only team that beat Indiana, and the Ohio State Buckeyes. They'll take on Clemson in the Sugar Bowl. We can start with Cael. Do you think this is closer than the Notre Dame game?
Absolutely, and Vegas agrees with me because the point spread in this one, Georgia is favored by 7 points in this one.
Clemson or Georgia?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong game. Yes, that the same point spread. It is 7. I was looking at the wrong 7 on my scorecard here. I've got all the bowl games up. That's my bad. Clemson is over Ohio State by 7. Thank you for correcting me on that, gentlemen. I would have kept going and would not have stopped. So Clemson is favored by 7 in this one. And honestly, I think that's about right. I would maybe argue that Clemson should be favored by 10 points just because there's a lot of controversy on like how Clemson really without Trevor Lawrence. And even without Lawrence, his backup, DJ, I think it's Uiagalelei. I probably butchered that. I don't know. He has a very hard last name.
Uiagalelei.
Yeah, okay. We'll let Ian say the name since I butcher it. But he definitely held his ground while Lawrence was out with COVID. And then I think he had an injury stint earlier in the year where he was out for 1 game, if I was reading the stats correctly. But as far as this game, again, I'm going to go back and say that I really don't think Ohio State should have made this playoff, but this is the matchup that we have. And 2, I think Alec made this point earlier. Clemson is emerging as a dynasty. They are really the emerging team in the college football landscape right now. Like, not even with Trevor Lawrence. They've proved that without Trevor Lawrence, they are still an elite team. And they've got Etienne at running back. He's very good. And they have a solid defense as well. And they've played almost double the games that Ohio State has this year. And if I look at Ohio State's schedule this year, if I can find it, here we go. Ohio State's 6 wins are against the following teams: Nebraska, Penn State, Rutgers, Indiana, Michigan State, and Northwestern. The Penn State win was probably considered a lot better at the time than it would be now because Penn State absolutely flopped this year in every sense of the word. They just fell apart at the seams from the get-go. And Ohio State did thump Nebraska 52-17, but Nebraska's really not a good team. Rutgers is not a great team either. Ohio State beat them by 22 points. A lot of points there. They managed to beat Indiana by 7, and they beat Michigan State by 40. But that Big Ten championship game, the final score was 22-10. But Northwestern kept it within one possession until about the final 4 minutes of the game. Northwestern was ahead at halftime with Ohio State at home. And that, for me, was the final straw. I said to myself, even if Ohio State wins this game, they're down to Northwestern, who's not a bad team, but they're a middle-of-the-pack ranked team. And I just don't see a semi-poor championship game being good enough to get a 6-win team into the playoff. And I will bring up the point that Trey Sermon absolutely turned on video game mode and had 29 for 331 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had one of the best days in college football history as far as running backs are concerned. But Ohio State greatly fell under expectations for that Big Ten championship game. And yes, Clemson has the one loss, but that's to Notre Dame. And they redeemed themselves. And that one loss was without Trevor Lawrence. And Clemson, again, they are cementing themselves as kind of the quote-unquote new dynasty in the college football playoff world. And I just think it will be very, very difficult for an Ohio State team that has played 6 games to beat Trevor Lawrence and the Clemson Tigers and Dabo. It's just, I don't think Ohio State is really on the level of Clemson as much as some people may believe. Yeah, Ohio State has Fields. They looked impressive, but they faltered in that Big Ten championship game. And I think that's kind of a sign of trouble. And Clemson will use the film from that game and use it against Ohio State. So I really think the point spread of 7, I think that's a little bit generous. I think Clemson wins this one by double digits. I don't think it will be a 3-possession game. I think it'll be anywhere between 11 and 16 points as far as Clemson winning that game. I just don't think Ohio State has really what it takes to beat Clemson at this point.
I think Cael's going to pick Clemson. Call me crazy, but you can go, Alec.
Oh, thank you. So, Cael, again, I'm going to disagree with you on Ohio State being deserving enough to get into that college football playoff. I think they deserve to be in there. Now, that Northwestern flop, you brought up that Northwestern flop, and this to me is a problem of twofolds. One is that Northwestern flop, and 2 is that Clemson lost to Notre Dame with DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback for Clemson. And that to me just proves that no matter where Clemson stands, even down their star quarterback, they're one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He will go down as in college football. I'm quite sure he will. The Lawrence era has brought Clemson from the dusk of dawn to the shining light of noon. So, as far as I'm concerned, being able to hold with Notre Dame, and I believe it was either triple or double overtime, somewhere along those lines, and being able to put that ball where it needs to be against what they call right now as a top 4 team, I guess, just shows the power of that Clemson team and how much, as I said, they are growing into that dynasty. And that is going to last for the next few years. I think Uiagalelei is going to lead them into that next phase of that dynasty. I think he is a great replacement for Trevor Lawrence after he leaves for the draft there and ultimately ends up in the Jaguars. So, and I look back at that Ohio State Northwestern game, that 22-10, and again, I was embarrassed by that. I was embarrassed as a Big Ten fan. I was embarrassed by that. I think Ohio State could have easily trounced Northwestern. I think Ohio State also could have easily trounced, I know I'm going to peeve off Ian here, easily trounced Indiana. I think Ohio State could have really gone on a roll against every team they've played this season. But I think they chose not to, and I think they chose to give up early in that Indiana game. They chose to give up early in that Northwestern game, and only in the back half of that Northwestern game, and then maybe say we'll say the mid part of that Indiana game, did they realize, hey, we're actually playing a football game here against a decent opponent who's going to kick our teeth in and make us lose our spot in the college football playoff if we don't do this, if we don't win this game. So, yes, at the end of the day, they pulled it out. But no, at the end of the day, does Ohio State beat a Clemson team that is gonna make them look like the team. I think Clemson's going to be that team that's going to put Ohio State in their place as far as this 2020 season goes and say, while you are a top 4 team, you're not on the level of Clemson and Alabama. Those two teams are combining on a different level right now, and it's going to be a very great matchup to see Clemson and Alabama in that championship game when it comes time for it, barring any unfortunates. Now, I will throw in this caveat. Should Ohio State win that game, and that's a big if, one of the biggest ifs I'll ever throw out there, should they win, I will not stop laughing for the next 2 days at Clemson. I will not stop laughing at them because you cannot go on that spread there, on that. And I think Vegas is actually getting this one right on a 1-point spread because it gives that kind of room for error should Ohio State actually decide to show up and play. I want to see the Ohio State team of old. What I saw this season was not the Ohio State team of old, and not the team under Urban Meyer that's going to fight for every inch of that ball that they wanted. I think they need to decide to show up and play and give us a good game against Clemson, no matter if it's a win or a loss for Ohio State. Ohio State needs to show up and play, and Clemson just needs to keep doing what they're doing. Ultimately, at the end of the day, no matter what happens, Clemson, in my opinion, comes out on top.
Yeah. I've been very high on Ohio State throughout the year. I had them ranked number 1 up until after the Penn State game. That includes the entire time they were in quarantine. I thought that they were going to sort of run away with the national championship this year. And there's certain teams you can feel it with. Like last year's LSU, during that Texas game, something just felt different about that team. Some of those, the two like big Alabama-Clemson rivalry years were with the 2 close games, those 2 teams felt different. And sorry, this Ohio State team, I just don't. This ain't it. But Ohio State really, really scares me with this, just because if Dabo Swinney wasn't such an idiot, I don't think that I would have any reservations about picking Clemson. But because, I mean, we talk about how it's tough for coaches to sort of, when you're at that high of a level, make your players feel like they're the underdog. And I think that's really true. Apparently, nobody told Dabo Swinney that it's a bad idea to try to destroy a team's credibility right before you're supposed to play them, and essentially try to piss them off in every way possible. So, for that reason, oh, and also the one game people really had a lot of questions about Ohio State going into was that Michigan State game, and they boat raced to Michigan State. And Michigan State's a team that they have historically struggled against. So all this is to say that I'm still stalling because I don't know who I'm going to pick. I think Ohio State covers, unlike you guys, but Let me think.
Ian's looking at his board right now, folks.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. I know Oklahoma's gonna win, but if North Carolina loses, no, I'm kidding. I'm not gonna be that one guy that's picking really conservative so he could win.
I must win against my peers.
I am that competitive though. And if I win, y'all will get trash talk.
Wouldn't expect anything less.
Man, I'm not a big Trevor Lawrence guy, but whether I like it or not, that dude's a stud. I'm gonna go with a tie. No, I'm kidding. I'm picking Clemson. This ain't the 1950s. I really don't like it though. And as I write it down on the board, I feel very nervous about it. So I guess we have to talk national championship now because we all have the same one. Because I decided to be boring and go with the crowd for once. Clemson and Alabama. Let's just say that they win by whatever the lines are for their for their respective games. Just initial thoughts on that matchup.
Alec, you want to go first or should I?
I'll throw this one. So my thing about this game is it's Clemson versus Alabama. What is this? Part 3 now?
Four.
Part 2 or 3 now? Part 4?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The 2 national championship games. The semifinal of the year, Alabama beat Georgia, and then this year. Oh no, it's part 5 because of that year that Tua got killed by Trevor Lawrence, and then it's this year.
Let's just agree that it's part too many, and the playoffs need to expand to 8. I will say.
We'll go back to that point again. Playoffs need to expand to 8. But whatever part this is, and I don't know how much you guys are going to agree with this or not, but these are 2 really good teams at one growing into their dynasty and one at the peak of their dynasty. It's almost as if Rome in Alabama is squaring off against what would be the up-and-coming Macedonian Empire when it was expanding under Alexander the Great. This is how I see this matchup playing down. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to whose defense stands up better. I don't think this will be an offensive matchup as much as it's going to be a defensive matchup. Both of these have high-powered offense led by great quarterbacks, have a great wide receiving core, and have great running backs. They're pretty much equal on that level. Where I think the difference comes in, and I think we mentioned this earlier in the show, is going to be that defensive portion. And when that defense really kicks in, the team that I see standing on top of the heap is the Crimson Tide. This year, I see it as the Crimson Tide. I see Rome beating the Macedonian Empire. I see Rome expanding their range and becoming all the more greater a football dynasty by adding another ring to their collection and by adding another college football playoff trophy to their collection. Give me the Crimson Tide.
Yeah.
Alec, you make many good points, but I will go back to one of my previous points that I made earlier. The only thing that can really make Alabama better is if Trevor Lawrence was their quarterback. Now, I think that, first of all, I'm going to say if this matchup plays out, it is going to be a fantastic championship game. One that I will definitely be tuning into.
Mm-hmm.
But, Alec, I agree with the fact that defense will be a big part of it, but I think the biggest factor in this game is going to be quarterback play. Because we've been talking about it for months. The race in the NFL for who's worse, the Jaguars or the Jets. Which one of them is going to be bad enough to land Trevor Lawrence, who is all said and done pretty much the number 1 overall pick at this point? And the reason for that is Lawrence does this year in and year out. I think his only loss in his college career, if I remember correctly, is that one loss in the playoff last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was to Burrow and the Tigers, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. I'm a bit fuzzy on that. Thank you for
Tigers
confirming.
versus Tigers game there.
Yes, exactly. Lawrence's only loss was to Joe Burrow, the number 1 overall pick of this previous draft. Now, Mac Jones is good. He will likely be a mid-first round pick as far as he goes. If Mac Jones can play the absolute game of his life and throw like 6 touchdowns and have an 80% completion percentage, and if Trevor Lawrence has like a meh game, then I can see Alabama winning. However, I just don't think Mac Jones will quite be at that level against this Clemson defense. I do think that Alabama has the edge as far as defense, but Clemson is not far behind. Clemson can definitely contain Jones enough for Trevor Lawrence to do his thing. He was born for national championship games, and he was born to bring home the hardware. I think that Lawrence, he might not have as good of a game as some of us may think he will. Like, maybe he has a turnover at some point. But I see him, he's ramped up his running game in the last few weeks. Lawrence is one of the best running quarterbacks that college football has seen in the last few years, and maybe even all time, if we want to go that far. Maybe not quite that far, with the look that Ian is giving me.
I was going to say, chill.
But
Denard Robinson, there's no way he's a better running quarterback than Denard Robinson.
Anyway, I digress. I see Lawrence throwing 3, maybe 4 touchdowns, maybe even 5 if he's playing very well. And then I think he has 70-plus yards on the ground and then a rushing touchdown to go with that. I think this is also going to come down to the wire. This might come down to whoever has the ball last, like it has in many college football championships past. But unless Mac Jones has the absolute game of his life and plays absolutely perfect, and then on top of that, Lawrence does mediocre, I really think Clemson wins this game just because of the sheer dominance that Trevor Lawrence brings to stages like this. There are players who have their careers made and broken from championship games. And Trevor Lawrence has proved time and time again that on the big stage, it is very stupid to bet against him. So I have Clemson edging this one out, barring that Mac Jones plays the absolute game of his life.
And much respect there on that opinion, Cael. I will give you that much. That is very well thought out there. I'm still going to stick with my pick of Alabama. I think just as far as this is going to be a defensive matchup, I think Alabama has that edge on defense. I think that's going to put at least some pressure on Trevor Lawrence to, as you said, maybe play that game. Now, I'm not going to go as far as you to say Mac Jones needs to play the game of his life in order to win. He just needs to play football and play Alabama football that they've been playing all season. Keep that consistency. Don't try anything new. Be consistent as an Alabama football player and to consistent of what that program under Nick Saban has been as that dynasty fulfills itself.
I don't know, bro.
You've got the house divided here.
You are the deciding vote, Ian.
Well, I think that the real winner is going to be all of us because this is going to be a fantastic game. So that's my pick. The fans.
No. Make a choice, buddy.
Man, is it too late to pick Michigan?
A little bit too late on that one, yeah.
Very much too late.
Hey, I just needed to make sure. Man, I don't know. I think it's going to come down to if we see the Alabama defense we saw in the second half of the Georgia game, or if we're going to see the Alabama defense we saw in the Ole Miss game. Alabama has the greatest offense of all time, but they're going up against the greatest defensive coordinator of all time in Brent Venables for Clemson. But I think the thing that's going to do it for me is Clemson's offensive coordinator, Tony Elliott, is in COVID quarantine. And I think it's for 14 days. And that news just came out today. So he's not going to be back for the 11th. So I know it sounds stupid to pick a game because of an offensive coordinator. But I think that just taking Clemson out of the rhythm a little bit, that could be the difference in this one. So roll dang tide, baby.
Roll Tide, baby. Roll Tide.
Ian, I can understand your logic with Clemson's offensive coordinator being out, but I don't think it's going to necessarily throw off the rhythm because it's Trevor Lawrence. He's going to make stuff happen. Even if the playbook is thrown out the window, he's going to make stuff happen because he's Trevor Lawrence. He's going to be the number one pick in the draft. And I just think that Trevor Lawrence is too big of a difference maker. Now, if 2020 is not over yet, there's still 27 hours of 2020 left at the time we're recording this, folks.
No, thank you.
So Trevor Lawrence, something could happen to him. He could test positive for COVID again, and then DJ would have to come in. So if Trevor Lawrence gets hurt or incapacitated in some way, shape, or form, either before or during the game, then I would have Alabama winning. But I just think Trevor Lawrence he just changes the entire game by just him being in. You think about how to defend him differently. You think about how to defend the people around him differently. Just because he's so mobile, running around with his feet, and then he's just got a great football IQ. So I can understand, doubling back to your point, Ian, why an offensive coordinator testing positive for the virus would be problematic. But I really don't think that'll be a big enough difference maker. I think that if Trevor Lawrence stays healthy and doesn't get hurt in some way, shape, or form before this championship game, barring that this matchup happens, which it likely will, I see Clemson winning this one.
I mean, I said earlier that Alabama is the greatest football team of all time, and I'm going to stand by that. Clemson might be number 2. I'm not going to lie.
With the way they've been playing the last few years, I could see that argument.
They're at a minimum number 4. Because I could see an argument for last year's LSU team and then some of those USC teams with Leinart and Bush. But other than that, you're going way too far back, and you've lost credibility then. Yeah, I don't like either of my playoff picks, but I guess I'm going to stick to my last 2 playoff picks, but I guess I'm going to stick to them. Yeah. Well, I guess that is going to do it for this. I mean, I'm just going to say it. This was like a ton of fun.
Absolutely.
I mean, this was a ton more fun than I even thought it was going to be. So I appreciate both of you joining us, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
I mean, we started recording this around our time, no matter what time zone you're listening to this, about Midwestern time, 6:45 here.
Mhm.
We've been going for over 2 hours.
We're wrapping this up at 9 o'clock with only a 5-minute break in between here. So this has been, I was excited for this all throughout the day. And to Ian's point, this was more fun than even I thought it would be. I think you and me, Cael, even you and me, I don't think you and I have ever sat down really to discuss this. I know I've sat down with Ian and discussed maybe in short form, but I never discussed anything with you exactly. So getting to discuss this with you and having that kind of third voice in here, kind of that roundtable discussion. And Ian, again, thank you for hosting here. Just brings out that kind of all of our sports IQs and brings us to that kind of next level as far as thinking in depth about what's going on in the world of sports, especially college football and especially in the year of 2020. So Ian, again, thank you for hosting. You've been a very gracious host. Thank you for having me back on for the second time this week. I'm happy to do it. I know Cael will probably echo my sentiments here. So
Yeah, absolutely. This was a ton of fun, Ian. Thank you for having me. And Alec, you and I have really never talked sports before, but you know what you're talking about, dude. And I hope we can have many more great debates like this between the three of us going forward on this podcast. So thank you, Ian. This was a fantastic way to spend some of the final hours of an absolutely terrible year.
Yeah,
very
I mean,
much so.
this is the most fun that I've had in a long time. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys doing this. I know this went longer than even my most yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, optimistic estimate was. But yeah, I like I said, I appreciate you guys doing this.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
And so that's going to do it for today's edition of the Top Tier Sports Podcast. Remember, the Top Tier Sports Podcast is always available online. Just check us out wherever you find your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, all of the above, or check us out on social media on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Join us again next time and have a fantastic day, everybody.